It's kind of interesting. I'll just tell you, he's a past business guy. He's like me, impatient. A lot of these projects take way too long. But another little tidbit, his father was on the Transportation Committee, I think, for 20-some years. He was chairman. Now that Bill's chairman of the committee, it's the second time in the Congress history where they have a father-son chairman of a major committee. I think he has 60-some members, Democrats and Republicans on that committee. But again, we've had a very good day. We've been out at, maybe mentioned this, but out at the beaches. We're out at the port. I'm excited about both of those, but I look at the port. We have 20,000 jobs out there currently. We'd like to double that. They've got the capacity to double it, so we've been spending a lot of time talking with the people there in that region. And then obviously there's a lot of other projects in Sarasota, Manatee County. We're going to work today and we're going to work tomorrow and take a look at a lot of those projects. I would like, because we have quite a few city and county officials here, make a point on your project or anything you think we should be talking about, because he's going to be here through Sunday and I'm going to be bending his ear on all the priorities in the community. I've always said, it's not what I think the priority is, it's what our elected officials think the priorities are. And my job is to work on your behalf as your representative in Washington to make sure he understands clearly what we're trying to get done. But with that, I'd like to introduce you to Chairman Bill Schuster, who is the chairman of an incredible committee that will be very helpful to us long term. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. I know that there's TV cameras or the local public access station is covering us, but I just want to tell the story. I just had to ask somebody, am I still in Manatee County or Sarasota? Because, you know, that's what I heard. But we were just in the chamber, and they said it's the area is Manatee, or no, Minnesota. But I thought, well, Sarah T also sounds pretty good too. So I hope that doesn't open up any wounds, because I know when communities are trying to do the right thing and expand and become regional in nature, I think that's a very, very positive thing for communities. And I know that Vern has talked a lot about what's going on here over the past couple of years. We served, as he mentioned, on the Transportation Committee for 4 years, so he knows intimately what the committee does. And all the jurisdiction we have, and if it moves in this country, whether it's by port, inland waterway, rail, highway, air, pipeline, all those things fall under the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. But we've got to work closely with our brethren on the Ways and Means Committee. The Ways and Means Committee is the committee that funds things, decides how the revenues are going to be collected or reduced. And so having an ally on the Ways and Means Committee who understands transportation, who embraces transportation, is extremely important. And also something that I like to point out about Vern is that on the Ways and Means Committee, there are very few members who, a lot of members came out of the business world, but very few of them are still in the business world. So when Vern Buchanan talks about how the tax rates or the tax code are hurting or helping business, he knows firsthand. And that's an experience and a knowledge that you just don't get that often on the Ways and Means Committee. So I'm proud to be here. Actually, Vern asked me, he kind of insisted that I come down here. And so I got to tell you, as we're going around today with some of the commissioners, they said we have sunshine laws here, and so we got to have a reporter or somebody always covering when they're here. But I thought the sunshine laws were that he was going to have the sun up there in the sky for me when I came. So I told him he's violated the sunshine law. At least my sunshine law. So, but no, it's great to be here to talk about transportation, what's happening down here in Manatee and Sarasota County and South West Florida, and in fact all across Florida and other places in this country. The nexus or the crossroads of transportation are extremely important, not only to the local community. You folks are all, I'm sure, aware what's going on at the Port of Manatee, and what they're doing is going to maybe even double the amount of jobs that are there, double the impact to the economy here locally. But that's also going to affect Central Florida, all of Florida. But the fact that you have routes 75, 275, and 4 coming out of those ports in this area. It reaches across the country. And that's what I've been spending my time, a lot of my time doing, coming to places like this, to Chicago, to the ports of Los Angeles, to Houston, other places that are, and there's many of them around the country, that what happens in these types of areas affects the nation. And moving forward, if you're talking about jobs, economic development, or trade, the fourth thing that should roll off your tongue is transportation. Because to create jobs, to see economic development, to see trade occur in the world, we've got to have an efficient transportation system. Being able to carry goods and people to the right places in the market, or carry them back from the ports into the inland of this country. So having a system that's efficient and safe is extremely important, and making sure as we move forward that we're making the right investments, making sure we're making investments that are fiscally responsible, that we're paying for what we do, and making sure the projects that we're working on are going to be important, not just to the area like here in Southwest Florida, but also what's going to affect the region, what's going to affect the nation, and there's hundreds of those kinds of projects around the country. I believe that the country's at a tipping point when it comes to transportation. You know, our bridges and our roads are deteriorating. Our airports, our 10 largest airports in the next, our 20 largest airports in the next year, half of them will face significant congestion problems. Our inland waterways we have locks and dams in our inland waterways that are 60 years old on average, and they were built for a 50-year life. Our ports, we're going to see the Panama Canal bring these super tankers, or not tankers, but super cargo ships coming through. And if we don't have ports that are dredged to 50 feet, they're not going to be able to pull into the East Coast ports. They'll be able to, as they do presently, into the West Coast ports, but we've got to make sure that we're prepared to have those products shipped in the most efficient, cost-effective way. And water is the least expensive way to transport. Our inland waterway system is the least expensive, and then by ships is second. So making sure that system is from the ports and the waterways to the rail, to the trucks, to the air, that system is working extremely well. But as I said, I think we're at a tipping point. You know, we've got to make sure we're making those investments. And if you look at America over the last 20 years, we've gone from top 5 transportation infrastructure systems in the world to now we're into the mid-20s. And once again, if we don't understand that, if we don't make those investments, we're going to continue to deteriorate. We're going to continue to not be competitive. I was just with the inland waterway folks, and as I travel around and come and hear this, I'll learn a lot of new stuff today, and that's why I do it. But I was with some of the inland waterway folks, and they were telling me that our soybeans are the most competitive in the world, and we're the biggest market in the world, and our closest competitor is Brazil. The reason we are ahead of Brazil is that our transportation system is much more efficient than theirs. So we can deliver soybeans to market cheaper than they can. They're eventually going to catch up to us. And right now, I just read an article that the Brazilians are building 230 or so dams, most of it for hydroelectric, but they're making massive investments in their infrastructure system. You see what the Chinese are doing. We've got coal. The folks in the coal industry have been telling me the reason our coal is so competitive in the world market is because our transportation system can get it to the markets around the world cheaper than other countries. So what happens, what doesn't happen in this country is going to affect this nation for the next 20 years. And as I look at this from a perspective of the federal government, it's very clear to me, reading the Constitution and looking at our history, that the federal government has always had a role in transportation. The Founding Fathers, in fact, enshrined it in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 says the federal government core responsibilities are for common defense, interstate commerce, and post roads. When you look at those things, it's very clear to me that it's about transportation. And then, of course, if you look back, little known historical fact, and for those that are watching, they can Google this and see if I'm accurate, because I had a couple people that questioned it when I was trying to sell a couple of my colleagues on the fact of the federal role. The Articles of Confederation, the tipping point and the reason they failed really was a transportation issue. It was the Virginia delegation led by Washington tried to negotiate a treaty with Maryland on navigation rights on the Potomac River. They wanted to get it and build canals and portage roads through western Pennsylvania into the Ohio Territory to open up and bring back those resources to the new nation. And they couldn't come together on these treaties. And when that failed, they came away, and those folks that were negotiating those treaties and those deals realized that the Articles of Confederation were not going to allow us to come together physically as a nation. And so they went back and drew up the Constitution we know today, Article 1, Section 8, which I just mentioned. And also, as they were going through the process, if you study the Founding Fathers, really probably the premier or the philosopher that all of them looked to was Adam Smith and what he wrote, Wealth of Nations and The Invisible Hand of the Market. But he also wrote that the government should provide the people with three things. They should provide them with security, preserve justice, and erect and maintain infrastructure to promote commerce. That is a core function of government. And so as I work through the issues we face in this committee and this nation, that's something that drives me and it keeps in the forefront. There's a lot of things we do in Washington, D.C., and a lot of them we shouldn't be doing. Those are states and those are local responsibilities, but the government has ballooned and grown and doing things, again, that I don't think they should. But we should have a Department of Defense. We should be dealing with commerce and the transportation system. The committee that I now chair, we're going to have three major bills in this Congress. The first will be the Water Resources and Development Act, which is the WRDA bill for short, deals with all the activities of the Corps of Engineers, and that includes dredging the ports. That includes restoration of your beaches, making sure that those beaches are protecting the shoreline of Florida and other places around the country. It includes the inland waterways, rebuilding the locks in the dam system in our inland waterway system. So that's something very important. We're starting to talk to the shareholders, the stakeholders. I even had the Assistant Secretary who was in Washington 2 weeks ago. I can't remember. I saw him and I said, "Where did I meet you?" He said, "I was sitting across your conference table from you 2 weeks ago." So I've been busy, so it's tough to keep things where I meet people. So we're meeting with stakeholders and trying to figure out, what we can do to improve all those transportation assets when it comes to the water and the different activities of the Corps. And a lot of that, it's not just all about money. In fact, a lot of it's about reform. The average Corps of Engineer projects takes 17 years. And we've got to reduce that. You look at a business today, if Vern or I were going to invest in a business and invest in a business venture and said, we're not going to get a return on our investment for 17 years, I wouldn't make the investment. I'm pretty sure Vern wouldn't make the investment. That's just way too long. And so we've got to make sure that the Corps is doing the right thing, because there's examples we learned the other day in the meeting we had. Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world, they're making billions of dollars in investments in other countries. The port of Kingston, Jamaica. They made, I think it was $1 billion or $2 billion investment, and they're doing it because they know what the government's doing down there. The government has said, we're going to do our part. The project gets done in several years instead of 17 years, and they made the key point is when we make those investments in other countries, they're not coming back to the United States. They're going to take those massive ships, they're going to transship, they're going to reduce the loads, and then they're going to pull into the ports of Florida and then shipped off to the nation. So we've got to make sure we're not missing those types of investments. And again, we're going to be working hard on the WRDA bill. Second bill we'll be working on is a railroad reauthorization bill dealing with railroad safety, passenger rail, which I know has been an issue here in Florida. When you look at this country and you look at the population growth, from 200 million to 300 million took us 65 years, and we crossed that threshold in 2005. From 300 million to 400 million, it's going to take us 32 years, and we're already 7 years into it. So 25 years from now, there's going to be another 100 million people plus in this country, and they're going to be in these congested corridors, like in Florida, the Northeast Corridor, Chicago, Texas, West Coast. If we don't figure out how to move people in different ways, we're going to have our roadways congested. All you have to do is look at the Northeast Corridor, I-95. We cannot physically or financially afford to add lanes to I-95. So we're going to have to figure out how to move people in different ways, transit, passenger rail, those things. So we'll be dealing with that with the railroad reauthorization. And then finally, the Surface Transportation Bill, which is the highway bill, the bridges, and many other intersections of the transportation system. The multi-billion, the $500, $600 billion question is, how do you pay for it? And I believe you have to keep every option on the table. The way we're collecting it today, do we need to do more of it? Are there new ways to do it? Public-private partnerships? Do you look at more tolling? I think everything has to be on the table, because at the end of the day, you're either going to pay by roads. There's either tax roads or toll roads. People are going to have to pay for it. And the system that we have in place, I think we need to maintain, is we pay as we go, and users pay for those things. So I think that's extremely important, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to work through as we do the transportation bill. But along with, and I'll give Chairman Micah just tremendous credit for MAP 21 and the reforms that he put in place that are going to reduce the time it takes to do major highway projects. He did a great job. We need to do more, and I look forward as we move through the next iteration of MAP 21, or whatever acronym we kind of figure out for it. We move forward with significant reforms, because I do believe it's not all about money. It's about doing things more efficiently, and so you can do more with less. I think there's going to be more investment need, but maybe not as much if we're building roadways in half the time. If we're building core projects in half the time, we see massive savings there. And there are projects all around this country you can look to say if it was built in 8 years instead of 15, or if the Port of Miami was started 2 years ago and it's still not started, you'd save millions of dollars there, multiple millions of dollars there. It can be done. And so we've just got to make sure that as we move forward, the groups like this that are here that care about transportation, the folks that are listening or watching, I should say, understand that the transportation system is something that touches all of us. And I look at this room here today, and every single person here was touched by the transportation system. The folks that are viewing this at home, they might have not left the house today, but when they went to the refrigerator to get milk to pour on their cereal, that got to the refrigerator because of the transportation system. And not just the one trip they made to the store to buy it, but it was probably 6 or 8 or 10 transportation moves until the fertilizer and the corn got to the cow, and the cow got milk to the processing plant, to get the plastic jug that was put in at the plastic plant. So that system affects us all, and we all need to care about it, because as I started saying, if we're concerned about jobs, economic development, and trade, you've got to be concerned about the transportation system. So with that, I'll end, and I guess we're going to open it up to questions, Vern.
Yeah, let me just say that one of the things, one of my new jobs I've got is chairman of the Florida delegation. We're the third largest delegation in the country. My first meeting that I did, you get some latitude. I mean, we talk about on a bipartisan basis what we want to do, but the first thing that I wanted to do was ports and trade, because we got 14 ports, $68 billion worth of economic activity, 550,000 I think is the number that they actually support. But we will be spending a lot of time on a bipartisan basis. We're the third largest delegation. It's California, Texas, and ourselves on a bipartisan basis. And the big thing we're going to be working on is things like transportation, the WRDA bill. The reason we don't have the WRDA bill done, which a lot of us would like to see ideally get done, some of it, is because we can't get a consensus in the Congress. So working on a bipartisan basis, when he needs some support and help, he can come to me, and hopefully I can deliver a lot of the Florida delegation, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. But we just had something in terms of greening, citrus, and everybody got on it, bipartisan, 100%. Every member, we have 29 members that are basically supporting 100%. So we hope to, as you get things that are important, and we got to figure out how to fund transportation, as he knows, and there's a lot of issues with it, but it's critical to this region. What I'd like to do is open it up for questions, but I'd like to get your thoughts, your comments, and if you feel very strong about a particular project or something that's bogged down, let us know. It's an opportunity, because I'm going to be spending another day and a half with him bending his ear on stuff for our area. So with that, right, the commissioner right there, Patterson. And she's, by the way, a pro. She's been doing this for a long time.
I don't know these days whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Congressman Buchanan, thank you so much, and thank you, Congressman Schuster, for visiting our area. We're very complimented and very honored to have you spend some time with us. I'd like to say that I am currently chairman of the Sarasota Manatee Metropolitan Planning Organization. I serve on TBARTA, and there is no bleeding between Manatee County and Sarasota County. We work cooperatively every day. The Metropolitan Planning Organization is fully behind Manatee's Port Connector project. TBARTA has made it, the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority has made it a top priority as even a possibility for a potential toll road. And it would be a great economic boon to the area if we could get that project kick-started. In Sarasota County, a great deal of our potential for future economic development is in the south part of our county. And River Road is a regional priority that allows Charlotte County and Sarasota County a great deal of additional mobility when we can get it raised out of the floodplain and 4-lane. That's been a project that Vern's helped us with over the years. We have done the PD&E for the north section and have acquired about half the right-of-way, but both Charlotte County and Sarasota County are united in the effort to get that done. And, you know, again, really appreciate your presence here. There are many needs, but as you even mentioned, transit, if in your travels and your explorations in Washington, in the new bill coming, hopefully we'll get out in the foreseeable future, areas like Sarasota and Manatee that are urban areas but not great big metropolitan centers have really been hurt in the last few years on transit funding. And we're having a tough time finding the capital to replace our bus system, and we really are trying, and in partial partnership with Manatee County, to expand that transit system to augment the arteries that you're talking about. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just say that the Port Connector Road, Fort Hammer Bridge, we're going to be talking about. I guess that's a big concern in the county. River Road is huge. We have got some things done in terms of 17 that went from 2 to 4 lanes, which is to counties that I represented, you know, for the last 6 years. And that was a big project, almost $100 million that got done, and they're well on their way if they're not about done with that. But we are going to be talking about these and beach renourishment, and, you know, in that Word of Bill, we got some money for in terms of working with Sarasota Bay, cleaning up some things there. So that's helpful, but we're going to be able to nail that down. Yes.
Thank you for coming. I'm mayor of Longboat Key, where Congressman Buchanan lives, and we all like to boat. And I think most of the people who live down here think of this as a boating area. And all of our inlets, from the north to the south.
He likes to boat too. I took him on a little boating trip. He's still mad at me for that trip.
The Corps has not done any dredging projects, I think, since the mid-'90s, and obvious funding problems. But do you see any future possible funding to try to fix some of the problems that we have? I mean, you almost can't get a boat in and out of any of our inlets.
Well, of course, there's a big debate going on. The recreational boaters pay very little into the fund, and so you've got the major shippers that pay all of it in. They want it all to go to the big ports, and so I think we've got to sit down and figure out how we're going to do it. In my district, we have recreational boating, and again, so it's always a tough issue. But when you talk about funding levels for dredging ports and things like that, what happens today is the inland or the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. The folks that pull into the ports of this country are paying into a fund as a user fee. People say it's a tax, but I say if you're not using the port, you're not paying into it. And we collect about $1.4 billion a year. We only spend $700 million of that. The other $700 million goes into the account, and then the appropriators use that as sort of the shell game to decide how they're going to move other monies, offset that to pay for this or that. I believe, and there's a number of us, and we tried in the last under MAP 21 under Chairman Micah's leadership to try to take the trust fund for the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and put it where it belongs. It's called a trust fund because the people that pay into it trust we're going to spend it on the intended purpose. So unlocking that alone would put $700 million a year into the dredging operations of the Corps of Engineers. So it's not, we don't have to raise taxes. We don't have to do anything. All we have to do is take that money and say it's going to be spent for its intended purposes, and then the appropriators have to find offsets other places that they've backfilled with that money. I think it's a fair issue. I think it's something we need badly. You go to the Port of Miami, the Port of Jacksonville, the Port of Tampa, the Port of Manatee. All your ports need to be dredged, and I believe the number I heard here was $4 million. Is the port director here? Was $4 million take care of that? I can't remember what the exact number was.
$4 million doesn't take care of anything.
Well, that cleans out the silt that's been building up and hasn't been dredged for the past couple of years. So that's one example. But I thought the number was $4 million. I don't know exactly what it was for. But you can do a lot of things with $700 million in a lot of ports in this country. I don't know if that's going to solve the problem for recreational boaters in the longboat area, but it's something that is going to add to the Corps being able to do other things if they're able to deal with those big dredging projects.
Let me just say, we had our delegation meeting. A lot of times I've met with the Corps for a lot of different projects in the area, one-on-one, and I've had overall pretty good luck. But when we did our ports and trade issues, and we had a lot of the guys that ran the ports from Port Everglade, Miami, and our port in Manatee, and Jacksonville, the port in Jacksonville, the number one thing, and everybody was very upset with, is the Corps, how long it takes. I think it's dysfunctional. It doesn't work. And when it was originally set up, it probably worked fairly well, but it's at best dysfunctional today. And I remember Debbie Wasserman was there, and she was very upset about something she's continued to work on. So that's where I'm hoping as a delegation, they have a big office in Jacksonville, the Corps does, as a delegation, Democrats and Republicans, we can bring some heat and make it more functional and get more of our projects done, because it's keeping us from a lot of good paying jobs. I don't know if the Corps is tied with the whole concept of Miami. They've got the money. They're looking to do some dredging. They can't seem to get the Corps or somebody to sign off the whole permitting in Corps. And I know we have to be environmentally sensitive, but some of these things drag on forever. But I agree with you, as someone that likes to boat, a lot of people that likes to boat, when you can't go out a new pass or big pass, longboat pass is a little better. I mean, it's pretty consistent. But those two passes you can't even go out of without worried about running ground or it's shifting all the time. It seems like we could do a better job of getting that marked, because we do have a lot of recreational boaters. A lot of people like to fish, charter fish, and everything else. So it's something we got to find a better way than what we're doing it right now, because it's completely unmanageable. The big marina there on Lido Key, he's telling me they don't let any of their captains go out New Pass, but they sit right on New Pass because they're afraid about running aground and damaging the boats and everything else. And I'll just say this, full disclosure, my nickname of my kids is Daddy Sandbar. So I've been on every sandbar everywhere. So I know all about getting a Corps in here and getting some things done. But
I appreciate that. And I suspect a lot of these voters would be willing to pay more taxes if they could help dredge the canals. And we're also working on a wider bike lanes on Longboat Key for Congressman Buchanan.
Well, don't get carried away now.
Good afternoon, Congressman Buchanan, and welcome to the Sarasota-Bradenton area, Congressman Schuster. I'm Andrew Gould, Student Government President at the University of South Florida, Sarasota-Manatee.
And I'm the Student Body Vice President, Stephanie Hames. Our campus of around 4,700 students, which is literally right around the corner over here, is part of the larger USF, University of South Florida system that serves 5-county region. We thank you for taking the time to hear our concern about this important transportation issue. In particular, we'd like to make you aware of the unsafe traffic condition right in front of our school.
We're currently working with our local state legislators as well as trying to work with the Florida Department of Transportation to resolve the traffic safety issues at our campus. Since construction began on current campus buildings, there have been 7 documented crashes near all 3 of our entrances. Just as recent as yesterday morning, a pedestrian was hit near our northern entrance.
The severe nature of these accidents demonstrates like the daily concern our students, faculty, and staff are facing when entering and exiting our campus. Local mass transit systems do not currently turn in because there isn't a traffic signal. Where am I up? Furthermore, we have to cross a dangerous 7-lane highway to catch the northbound bus without a crosswalk or median island to protect us.
The student body of USFSM is thankful for any assistance you can provide as we desperately seek to install a traffic signal, median, and crosswalk, which we have dedicated funds to support to stem the tide of accidents, injuries, and deaths affecting our area. We're curious, are there any provisions in recent federal legislation that would help assist us with the unacceptable traffic safety issue facing our campus?
Well, let me just say, because I'm pretty familiar with that, that 7 lanes, just trying to pull out in the 7 lanes from here roughly, or any of these areas. But I don't know if that's so much a federal issue, but what I'd like to do is invite you to come in my office. Let's sit down. I wasn't aware of that, and it might have to work with the county officials in both counties to see what we can do to address that, because that's unacceptable, the amount of accidents and activity. And if it's something we can do on the federal level, we'll look at that. But I don't know if that's more of a local issue, but we'd like to work, because it's not just your campus. We've got 3 campuses right there in that general area, and I think it's something, and those campuses have grown a lot in the last 10 years in terms of doubling the population, and they're going to continue to grow, especially USF.
There is in the last several transportation bills, there's a pot of money in there. It's a small pot of money, but it's safe roads to schools, which deal with crosswalks. I'm not sure that it focuses on college campuses, but more elementary schools and high schools. But I don't know enough about the details. It's something that we might be able to look at. But I think it really deals with our secondary and elementary schools. But as Vern said, I think it's a local issue, and anything we can do to give you information to help, we're certainly there to help you.
Yeah, Sally's right there. If after the meeting you get with her and come on in, I head up. You can come in Monday if you want. I got to head up at noon to Washington, but I'll be glad to talk to you about it and see what we can do. I'll probably end up working with the county officials, some of them in the room here, and see what we can do about it. But I appreciate you bringing the point up.
Welcome, Congressman Schuster and Congressman Buchanan. My name is Mike Lachey. I'm with Florida Walks and Bikes, a statewide group which achieved 5 changes in Florida law last year. I have 3 requests which I'll provide in writing to you at the end of this meeting. First regards to what we in the bicycle pedestrian world call fair share. And basically boils down to this. Florida is the nation's leader in bicycle and pedestrian fatalities. We've been #1 or in the top 3 ever since the year 2001 in both bicycle and pedestrian fatalities per capita. And this 4-county area, Manatee, Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Sarasota, is the hot spot in the state. We call it the Crash Crescent. To address and hopefully solve this problem, we ask you to fix a long-standing inequity. In 2010, the last year that I have statistics available, fully 14.9% of U.S. traffic fatalities were bicycle and pedestrian related, most of it's pedestrian. Yet, in 2009, again the last figure, but it hasn't changed since then, less than 1% of U.S. DOT's safety program funding, I'm referring to the HSIP fund and the 402 funds, went to bicycle and pedestrian safety programs. So what we're asking is that the funding follow the need, that you raise the amount of funding being spent, that you do what you can to raise the amount of funding being spent by the states in HSIP and 402 funding. Now our actual long-term goal is that you raise it up to the percentage of fatalities in this mode that you would end up with.
And you said that's 14%?
14.9%.
Okay.
1 in 7 U.S. traffic fatalities is bicycle and pedestrian related. So now I say that's a long-term goal because I recognize that an abrupt shift from less than 1% to 15% would be probably administratively difficult. But that's why I say a long-term goal. So in the short term, though, I'd like to ask you to maybe consider doubling it, tripling it, that kind of thing, and then with the long-term goal of getting it up there. And of course, I can understand some counter-arguments. Someone might say, well, gee, maybe there are other modes where we might get a greater safety impact from spending there than in bicycle pedestrian. But let's have that conversation. If you want to have that conversation, we in the bicycle pedestrian world would love to have it with you, and we think we can show, we can meet that argument. My second request, in 1989, I worked with then Senator U.S. Bob Graham, and we reinstated the position of USDOT Bicycle Pedestrian Coordinator in USDOT. Since then, that position has lapsed. Now, what would that do? That would put bicycle and pedestrian transportation on a par with other forms of transportation, transit, rail, trucking, etc. And what does, and this would allow more resources to be devoted to it. In justification for this, I offer this one point. Everybody here is a pedestrian. All of us are pedestrians. As we say in one of our mottos, we are the 100%. So, and my last request is, and this would impact us locally, is increased funding for rails to trails. Abandoned railroad lines, as you know, represent an enormous resource and opportunity for many local communities. Banked and preserved, they can become, later on they can become mass transit routes, they can be kept for train routes, and they become utility rights of way. In the meanwhile, while they're not being used for that, they can generate enormous benefits in terms of recreation, quality of life, and economic. As an example, the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council reports that 3 trails near Orlando generate $42 million a year in annual revenue and support 516 jobs. And we have huge opportunities here in Southwest Florida. The counties and our various public agencies own vast tracts of land. There are abandoned railroad lines running through them. And we in this area could generate significant tourism and quality of life benefits from that. So we ask that you support a significant increase in federal funding for rails to trails. Thank you.
Let me just say, and then I'll have Chairman talk about it. I rode 4,000 miles on my bike last year, so I average 300 miles a month, so I'm kind of a bike enthusiast. But Legacy Trail that the commissioners in Sarasota County is talking to John today out in Anna Maria, what they're doing out there, what they've done in Longboat Key. It's becoming, Sharky's the other day, I was out there for a different event, and they're hosting bike things down in Venice. So there's more and more activity. People are wanting to get out and ride their bikes. I think especially as any age, but especially as you get a little bit older, it's a little easier on the joints. But we've got to do everything we can to make it as safe as we can. And I see a lot of growth in this. And of course in Washington, I see people always riding their bikes to work. And we're getting some people in this area, they're riding their bikes. And different parts of the country they do. And I don't think we've put enough in this area in terms of energy. And I'd like to work with you and see what more we could be doing. Because I've never heard that statistic that 1 in 7 that are killed on the road are bikes. But I just think there's a lot more that we could be doing. I think we've come, to be fair about it, I do think, and I'm not talking about the fatalities, I don't know about that, but they have done a lot more in terms of railroads converting, and I think there's going to be a lot more ideally that gets done once they have the funding. But I think it's moving in the right direction. But in terms of safety, there's a lot of other things that can be done, including on the biker side, and being more visible on the road, more aggressive lighting on the bikes. I see people riding at night that don't have lights on, so there's more that can be done that way. So it's a two-edged sword, but I do think we can do a better job. It means more for the environment, more for health, a lot of things in terms of getting more people that have an interest in getting on a bike. Chairman?
Well, I just first want to state I've supported rails to trails in my district over the years. It is, as you mentioned, it's good for the local economy. But I also, in the last MAP 21, I supported taking that mandate from the federal government to the state governments to spend their precious dollars on rails to trails versus bridges that are falling down. Because in my state, we have 5,000 bridges that are in terrible shape. And I support that because I believe that there are certain things the federal government should be doing. I mean, we should be in some ways not leading at the forefront of encouraging biking, but supporting it where we can. But I really believe that's a state and local issue. For me, at the federal level, to tell the state of Oklahoma that they should invest X amount of dollars in bike lanes and things like that. I talked to the local folks in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they're 99.9% of the people, 99.5% of the people, something like that, drive their cars. And some local folks wanted to have the money to take 4 lanes, reduce them to 3, create bike lanes, and I at the federal level, that's not my job. That's the state's job. That's the state and the local. If you've got a biking community here, then by all means, petition your state government and say, help us get some necessary funding. Again, there's small pots of money, and we didn't say states couldn't do it. We said it's up to the states to do it. The fatalities, I've not heard that statistic, but if that's an accurate statistic, it's a disproportionate share of fatalities that are occurring, but it's also a disproportionate share of people on the roadways. I would guess in Florida, 95% of the people, if you look at the national average, 95% of people get to work by means of a car. Go to urban areas, that shrinks a bit, but it's still disproportionate. Increasing funds to rails to trails. Well, we got to look at everything at Washington, holding level unless you're willing to increase taxes on things. So it's a very, very difficult thing to see those accounts increase. But again, I've been a supporter of rails to trails in my district, but I think that's really a local and a state issue because each state is different. When you have these one size fits all, you're telling states to do this or that, even when it's coming to how they're actually constructing roads and the speed they're using, it ends up putting solutions in place that I don't think are that effective. So again, that's where I come down on the issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate you both being here today and taking time out with us. Just coming from a transportation background, and to me, when I talk about 3 Ps in America, I think of people, places, and prosperity. And the route to that is transportation, by all means, and it affects all of that. And we do need to rely upon multimodal transportation. There's only so far, as you said, that you can expand the highways and the infrastructure. So what I'm wondering about is I've heard a lot about rails. I've heard a lot about ports. I haven't heard a whole lot about the air freight industry and the opportunities actually that there is, especially with everybody wanting things today, yesterday. So with that, I'm just wondering what evolution might be coming about in the air freight industry to help alleviate some of the surface transportation, especially on the trucking industry.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say this. I'm actually meeting with the airport right after this, so we're going to talk about this. I think it leads to more opportunities and more jobs, and we've got to continue to work with our airport to make it more viable. Not that it's not terribly viable, but we want to help get it to the next level because it's just it keeps people from having to drive up for Tampa. It's a great airport, and then obviously moving packages and other things on the airplanes and stuff make a lot of sense because it creates more local jobs in the economy, especially when we got the postal facility here looking at closing down. It would be a great opportunity to expand that. So I'll just say to the airport executive here, put that on your list because I want to talk to you about what more we could be doing or is there anything we can do to help you in that area. I think it's a good point there. Do you want to just say one thing about it real quick? Are we doing much in packaging and stuff here at the local airport? I'd be just curious.
No, we're not, and some of that's related to the physical location between Tampa and Fort Myers, which have very large air cargo operations there. And remember, despite air cargo, there still are very large trucking operations. You'll see a lot of FedEx and UPS trucks on the road, and the packages still have to get to the aircraft. So until this area has enough critical mass to support that level of service from a business standpoint, you'll continue to see a lot of that truck to Tampa and to Fort Myers because those already exist. Maybe in the future as the area grows.
Okay. Well, I'll talk to you. We'll talk about that, Chairman.
Yeah, talk in the broader sense of the airline industry, which includes cargo, air cargo, includes passengers. In a $16 trillion economy, the airline industry, passengers and cargo, they contribute $1.2, $1.3 trillion to our GDP. Incredibly important to us. And when you look at the cargo that's shipped by aircraft, I think the last statistic I saw is it represents about 60% of the value of cargo shipped everywhere. That number might even be low. And that's people look and go, well, that's kind of crazy. You get a lot of stuff coming in a ship. But that's usually lower cost of things. Things you ship in air cargo are very high-end, high-tech, very expensive components, things that have to be just in time, things that companies don't want to keep on the shelf for days and weeks. They want it there the next day. So very, very expensive things get shipped by air because of that just in time. But the entire industry, when you look at how we tax an airline ticket, for instance, 25%. And if you look at the sin taxes, tobacco, alcohol, and guns, we tax an airline ticket more than any of the three of them. So I've said to people, it must be a sin to fly because we're taxing it like a sin tax. And so we've got to look at, we've just now seen a big merger between American Airlines and U.S. Airways. I think that's going to be a good thing. I think that the airline industry is finally right-sized. I think they're going to, those four big carriers, and there's half a dozen smaller carriers, are going to be able to finally get to a profit. You look the last 20 years, they've had about 5 or 6 profitable years. Over that period of time, you look at it, they've lost money. And we need to have a vibrant airline industry, cargo and passenger. You look at the airline industry, it is the most regulated, deregulated industry in the United States. We treat it like a piggy bank. The President has just a couple months ago offered up one of his revenue ideas is to charge airline or planes either landing or taking off, I don't know which end of it, $100. That's just another tax on top that they can't afford. So we've got to have an airline policy in this country that gets those airlines to the same place the railroads are. Profitable, they can put money back into their infrastructure. So if they want to do something here at the port or at the airport, they're going to come in with some of their own money and say, hey, we want to extend the runway because we believe this is a market that we can expand. And that's something we really have to take a close look at moving forward. Again, an incredibly important part of the system. We've got to make sure that they're viable and we're not killing them with taxes.
While we're talking about airport, Mayor, you were just in my office in Washington. Why don't you tell us where we're at with the Venice Airport? Because I know we've come a long way in the last 6 years, and I just want the chairman to be aware of where we're at and what more we need to get done there.
Well, thanks, Congressman Buchanan and Congressman Schuster. Thanks for coming to Sarasota. Just did get back from D.C. and still a little bit cold.
It's colder in Pennsylvania.
I believe that. We have had some very good luck as of late with the airport. Reconstruction of a runway that has been in existence since World War II, totally resurfaced and renumbered from 422 to 523. It's our noise mitigation runway, and early reports from pilots, they love it, and better reports from the area residents because it is noise mitigation, they equally love it. And we're in the process of now being in line from FAA funding to shift the threshold of our other runway, 1331, to pull some homes out of an RPZ in that area. So we've had some tremendous good news from our airport as of late, and we really appreciate anything that you can do to keep the funding from the FAA coming so that we can finish that project. And along the same lines, we were actually in Washington for the ASBPA, American Shores and Beaches, and some very interesting information from that conference and the devastation that various states suffered from Hurricane Sandy and, I guess, Superstorm Sandy, and the beach renourishment program, how it really cut down, mitigated a lot of the damages in the areas, and anything that you can do in that line as well to keep the Corps renourishing the beaches and giving us some further protection is deeply appreciated. Thank you.
We were just out at the beaches, Readington Beach?
Yeah, Readington Beach.
Seems like it was days ago. No, but that's one of the core Army Corps of Engineers functions is those restoration, renourishment programs, and most folks don't realize that they're levees. We call them dunes or whatever we call them, but they're protecting the shoreline, just like the levees in New Orleans or the levees in along the Ohio River in Pennsylvania, Ohio. Those levees and those dunes protect the shoreline, so they're incredibly important. And we got to make sure, as we learned today, the Corps puts things in place that cost more money, that don't necessarily benefit the protection, nor do they necessarily benefit the environment over time. And that's a lot of what the Corps has been doing, are these environmental restoration projects, which are important, and I'm not opposed to that. I want to make sure our environment's clean and safe, but sometimes they go too far, they suck away the money, and instead of protecting lives, we're protecting fish or snails or the Indiana bat, which is a nuisance in our, or I guess some people don't think it's a nuisance, but I don't know, I've never even seen an Indiana bat.
We have time for just one more question.
I thought you were going to say, unfortunately, you have an Indiana bat here.
No.
Congressman Buchanan and Congressman Schuster, thank you both for pulling this together today and coming down here to our area. Michael Howell from the Sarasota Manatee MPO, Executive Director there. As you commented at your luncheon comments, Congressman, I'd like you to maybe reiterate it for those that weren't there, about the funding crises that we have in our transportation industry. As I mentioned to you after lunch, I was able to chair a Blue Ribbon Committee in the state of Florida, but this is a debate that's going on throughout the nation. I mean, I read articles every day about the states that are struggling to try to supplement investment in infrastructure because of the fact that there's not enough money coming in anymore. As I know you're aware, we're about $30 billion in deficit now over the last 5 years from what used to be the sacred cow of the Transportation Trust Fund. But I guess my question is how do you see us getting ourselves out of this? Is it gas taxes? Is it vehicle miles traveled? I know you commented earlier, but where's the solution in all of this? Because I do think there needs to be a reckoning with the issue.
I think long-term, vehicle miles traveled is going to be the way that you have to apply the user fee. And it is a user fee. If you use the roads, you pay for the roads. That's the pay-as-you-go system that was put in place by President Eisenhower in the 50s, and it has worked well up until the last several years. But I don't think it's ready for prime time because of the technology. There are folks out across America, and I don't blame them. Whether they're from the right or the left, they are concerned about Big Brother knowing where they are. But I think as the next generation of young people move forward, they know if you're carrying a cell phone around or using a credit card, the government can figure out where you are. So we just got to make sure that they're not used in the wrong ways. But so vehicle miles traveled, again, long term, I think the solution and how we implement it is something that we're going to have to debate and discuss. In the short term, I think you have to look at all the options available to us. Is it the user fee we pay at the pump? Presently 18.3 cents. It was raised 20 years ago, and now it's worth less because of inflation. Do we do more tolling? And there's some tolling that's been done out there, high capacity lanes, adding lanes. I think it's something that's positive. But I look across the country. I look at Pennsylvania, for instance. I-95 through Pennsylvania, about 60 miles of road. It's the only place north of Baltimore that doesn't have any kind of toll on it. Everything else is tolled, and it needs to be rebuilt. It desperately needs to be rebuilt. It's about a $13 billion price tag in the state of Pennsylvania. Can't afford to do that, or it'll stop replacing a lot of these bridges that we have that need to be replaced. So looking at tolling, public-private partnerships, bringing the private sector in to leverage their dollars. And Chairman Micah on MAP 21 was able to increase the TIFIA, which deals, it's a public pot of money that guarantees loans and things like that. We raised it from $250 million to $1 billion, and we're able to bring in $6 to $10 of private money to leverage against TIFIA. So those are some of the ideas. We need to expand them. I also think, as I said earlier, we need to cut the red tape. We need to reduce the time it takes to build a major roadway project, which averages 15 years. I use the the Oklahoma City Crosstown Expressway as an example for two reasons. One, because when I arrived there, they were tearing down the old roadway, and they brought this. I was leading a delegation of members up onto the roadway, and they had this big blown-up picture of a congressional delegation that was there 15 years earlier. And front and center at the podium was my father. I think they did that for my benefit. But so I didn't know he was there, but there's a picture. I said, when was he here? Oh, 15 years ago. He said he was going to make sure that he was going to be supportive of the Crosstown Expressway and how important it was to Oklahoma. Well, so I show up 15 years later. They're tearing down the old. They just opened up the new roadway, and they said it took 15 years. It cost $680 million to build it. If we were able to cut in half the time to build that roadway, inflation alone, the savings would have been $60, $70, $80 million. You take that in one road project in Oklahoma, you multiply it times the thousands across America, you're probably talking billions of dollars in savings. So we've got to cut through the red tape. And there's some notion in Washington, D.C. that the people at EPA or the Corps of Engineers or Fish and Wildlife care more about the environment of Florida than Floridians do, which is, it's hogwash. We have the same notion that in Washington, the Department of Education, they care more about our children than we care about our children back in our states. You know, we've got to be able to tell Washington to back down. We want to make sure if we're doing things that affect, if Florida's affecting Georgia, that's where Washington needs to come in and be the referee. But a lot of these road building projects, they can be done at a state level much faster, much more efficiently, and we can get a lot more done with the dollars of the taxpayer dollars. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. And I just mentioned the trust fund. It is going down. It became about 6 years ago, we started having to backfill with general trust fund dollars. But when people start driving electric cars and not paying anything, they're getting a tax break to get an electric car. I think electric cars are good, but getting a $6,500 tax break at the federal level. Pennsylvania, we give them another $2,500, and then they drive the roadways in Pennsylvania, they don't pay a dime. So that's something we have to address, and that's why we've got to be looking at a fix here in the next couple of years.
Let me just say, in closing, one thing in terms of paying per mile driven or whatever. Yeah, my son told me the other day, cars that are coming out 100 miles to the gallon. That's not, 10 years from now, that's on the ground now. These battery operated cars, you can go 65 miles an hour, you can go to work one way, 12, 15 miles and come back, plug it in. If you need more than that, then all of a sudden you can use the gas in it. But in theory, you average over 100 miles per gallon. That's my understanding. So you've got to look at the problem in Washington is the same problem in transportation funding as it is with dealing with entitlements and everything else. It's dysfunctional. We've got to work together on a bipartisan basis. When I sat on that committee, the chairman before him, Don Young, was telling me they don't have the courage to deal with it. And Steny Hoyer, who's a Democrat, and I like Steny, I can work with Steny, he said we've got to find a way to make these tough decisions and get in the boat at the same time. Because everybody up there has known that we've got a problem in funding the transportation. Nobody wants to have a tax increase, nobody. But at some point, you've got to deal with these kinds of things, and the way to deal with them is on a bipartisan basis. And it's entitlements, it's a lot of things, a lot of the challenges that we've got in Washington today. That's why I'm kind of excited about heading up the Florida delegation, because when you get people in the room and you talk, you can find out, you can agree on 80% of the things. You can work on a bipartisan basis. And that's what's desperately needed in Washington right now. We've got to find a way to work together. His committee, if you talk to his committee, everyone, Democrat and Republicans, most of them, they're on the committee, would get agreement. But when you get outside the committee, it makes it tougher. So we're going to help deliver some votes for you on the things that we need to do, the tough decisions, so that we can make sure we fund projects here that are important to our community. But I'd just like to say in closing, I want to thank the chairman for being here today. He's going to be a great leader. He's been a mentor to me, and I appreciate his friendship. And we're going to continue to talk about projects in Sarasota and Manatee County. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.